So just to put this into context, what we're looking at here is the representation of events. Now, events, of course, is one of the representation categories that could come up on the exam alongside things like gender, ethnicity, age, issues, which of course came up last year on the paper, so there's an expectation it hopefully won't come up again. Have I missed anything out? National identity, regional identity. So I'm just going to talk you through one of the events that we looked at over the last few weeks, and that was the way in which different media outlets reacted to Theresa May's triggering of Article 50, initiating the formal exit from the European Union. We started this particular lesson, as you can see from the slide in front of you, that with a look at the conventions of the news genre, as one of the texts that we looked at was the BBC 6 o'clock news. So we looked at the newsroom setting with its hordes of journalists feverishly working away, producing the news. We looked at the BBC icon even lower left, and obviously at the top left of the screen as well, just identifying and branding the channel. If I move on, we then looked at the presenter George Alagaya in his very the visual code of the prop, the formal costume, the graphic behind him, underlining what the main story, the main headline in this case was Article 50 being triggered. One of the reasons we looked at the conventions of news is because, of course, that the exam this year, 2017, will be a moving image text on section 1, so there's no saying that it won't be something like the news. From there, we just had a look at this still of BBC political editor Laura Kuenssberg on the grass outside Westminster, a little outside broadcast where she interviews some of the main players in the Article 50 and Brexit negotiations that will come. We had a quick chat about the unique way in which the BBC is funded. Of course, it is funded by the license fee, making it a public service broadcaster. However, one of the things that often gets sort of misunderstood about the BBC and about news in particular is the fact that all news in the UK, regardless of whether it's the BBC, Channel 5, Sky, doesn't matter who owns it, it has to be neutral and impartial and abide by broadcasting regulations. So we looked at, won't be able to watch it via this particular PowerPoint, but there'll be links to it elsewhere. We looked at the BBC 6 o'clock news report on triggering Article 50, which, as you would imagine, for A, the BBC, and B, television news, was a model of impartiality. There was no bias. It was very neutral. They made sure they acknowledged that this was a historic event, was what George Alagaya referred to it as. He said Theresa May made history today with that announcement. They underlined that by showing the precise moment, 12:25, when the negotiations got underway, when the letter was delivered to Donald Tusk at the EU. We saw clocks in London, Westminster, and in Cardiff, in Edinburgh, and in Northern Ireland, Stormont, to show that this was a moment of significance right across the UK. We heard from Theresa May. Obviously, many of the words were direct from Theresa May. There was no spin, there was no bias, there was no opinion or editorialising. Everything was kept very, very impartial. But then, of course, we passed to the reaction from the President of the EU, Donald Tusk. We then got responses from a range of interested parties, Jeremy Corbyn, Nicola Sturgeon, Tim Farron, who is the leader of the Liberal Democrats. You may remember them. They all got a chance to be heard, so we got that full range, that all the shades of opinion were reflected and represented in this very objective and neutral report. We also saw reactions of just ordinary people. We saw a group of people who were there to celebrate, but we also saw a bunch of opera singers who were there at Westminster to lament. They said it was more like a wake for them, this particular moment, this particular event. But now we come to two alternative ways in which this story was presented by newspapers, by British newspapers, who aren't, of course, bound by the same regulation, the same need to be objective and neutral as we see that affects television reporting. So this was the Daily Mail, of course, a notoriously right-wing newspaper, and they decided to splash on two stories on the same day, both under the banner headline Freedom, this great abstract noun presented as an exclamatory. On a historic day for Britain, Theresa May signs the letter that tells EU we're out, capitalising the out, very serious, solemn Theresa May mid-scribble of her signature. And they had paralleled this with a second story. On a historic day for justice, Marine's wife celebrates the news he'll be home for Easter. So the Daily Mail, as you would expect for a right-wing newspaper, seeing the signing of this of Article 50, the triggering of Article 50, as an unequivocally good, bright day for Britain. And we can see similar ideology reflected on the front of the Sun newspaper, the most popular of the red top newspapers in the UK. And the Sun recently invested in a machine that allows them to project the headlines onto different objects. So we've got here the Sun, Dover and out. They actually beamed the headline beamed their front page headline, banner headline, onto the White Cliffs of Dover. They did the same with See EU Later. They also recently beamed a message onto the Rock of Gibraltar, hands off our rock, when there was that kind of rumbling about us potentially going to war with Spain. We'll have to wait and see whether, they might use this machine to beam an apology onto the main stand at Anfield to all the Liverpool fans that are still, incredibly upset with them, and no wonder. Back to this particular story though. The Sun, again, as a newspaper that campaigned for Brexit, very strongly in favour of Brexit. If I delve a little bit closer, we see the full text, and now one of the things that's interesting about the way the Sun have presented this is that they have put their editorial on the front page. Now the editorial is the section of the newspaper in which it's the voice of the paper, the Sun says, and it's only on rare sort of major significant occasions when the editorial will appear on the front of the newspaper. If we delve inside, it's finally here the most momentous day in Britain's modern history. So, superlatives, alliteration to, hammer home the impact of this. Today, Theresa May will officially tell the EU we're off. The informal mode of address reflecting the typical style, signature style of the Sun. Once the PM's letter triggering Article 50 is delivered to EU Council President Donald Tusk at 12:30, there is no going back. Brexit will be underway, and with it our tricky extrication from Brussels' grip, negative noun for Brussels, and the plotting of a new course toward a better, more prosperous future. So the positive adjectives, again, the whole thing from headline to the language of this editorial, suggesting how just hugely significant and positive this is. The fact that the Sun had splashed with a pun shows that they felt this was a moment when they could be light-hearted, they could be fairly frivolous, even though it's a serious event. They don't have to mark it with real solemnity, because this, in their view, is a very, very positive moment for the UK. Now, if the question about events comes up on the exam, they would ask you to write about two events and to write about at least two media texts or outlets that have represented that event. What you can see in front of you here is a little close extract that we did on the second event that we will be looking at, that we have looked at this year, which was Donald Trump's election victory, and the way that was reflected again in the pages of the Sun, the pages of the Daily Mail. So there is you could say a little narrowness in the range of text that we've looked at, but they both offer some really interesting ideological perspectives on how these events have been represented. So you can look at the, look at that close extract there. And this is likely to be, the question, using your own detailed examples, explore the representation of two events. And you can see the four texts that we would be concentrating on the screen in front of you. That's the Sun and the BBC News at 6 for Article 50, and then the Mail and the Sun with Trumpquake and Doe, and in the way they represented the election of Donald Trump. So I hope that brings a little bit of light, brings a bit of clarity. Events wouldn't be, if I'm being honest, it wouldn't be my preferred question to come up on this exam paper, but it is one that is there in the mix. It is one that could well come up on the paper this year. So we just have to wait and see until the morning of May the 18th, and we will find out exactly what the good people at WHJC have gone with for this final parting shot of the AS media exam in its current guise. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.